CEO fired me after 30 years, then 90% of his biggest clients pulled their contracts. The morning they fired me, it was raining. Not a dramatic downpour, just a persistent, quiet drizzle that had been falling for 3 days straight. Fitting, I thought, as I took my last elevator ride to the 34th floor. 30 years at Meridian Global Consulting, and it ends on a gray Tuesday in April. My name is Eleanor Voss. You've probably never heard of me, and that was by design. I wasn't the person whose name appeared in press releases or industry magazines. I was the person they called at 3 a.m. when a Fortune 500 client was threatening to walk. I was the steady hand that guided faltering product launches into successful territories. I was the institutional memory that remembered why we abandoned certain strategies in 1997 that some bright young MBA wanted to resurrect in 2015. I've survived 12 CEOs, each with their own vision, their own revolution, their own groundbreaking approach. Some wanted to focus on tech clients. Others pushed us toward financial services. One particularly misguided soul wanted to pivot entirely to cryptocurrency consulting back in 2018. I outlasted them all. They call her the company ghost. I once overheard a new vice president say. He didn't realize I was in the adjacent conference room, reviewing client documents. She's been here since the Reagan administration. It wasn't quite that long, but I understood the sentiment. While everyone else played musical chairs with their careers, hopping from firm to climb the corporate ladder, I stayed. I built something here. Client relationships that span generations. The Japanese conglomerate that wouldn't sign a contract until they'd had tea with me personally. The German manufacturing CEO who called me before his own board when considering acquisitions. The Saudi investment group that insisted I review every document before finalizing any deal. These weren't just clients. They were relationships built on decades of trust, problem solving, and the kind of institutional knowledge you can't teach in business school. So when Evan Caldwell's assistant scheduled a quick morning chat in his office, I didn't think much of it. New CEOs always wanted to pick my brain, understand how the machine worked before they started tinkering with it. At 58, I'd been through this routine before. But Evan wasn't like the others. At 39, he was the youngest CEO in company history, plucked from a rival firm where he'd made a name for himself by slashing costs and boosting quarterly profits. The board had been dazzled by his PowerPoint presentations filled with upward trending graphs and promises of streamlined operations. His office was different too. Where other CEOs had wooden desks and family photos, Evan's space looked like a tech startup crossed with a luxury hotel lobby. All glass, white surfaces, and not a single personal item in sight. Just motivational phrases etched onto glass panels. Disrupt or die. Move fast, break things. Yesterday's success is today's failure. Eleanor, please have a seat, he said without looking up from his tablet. After 30 seconds of swiping and tapping, he finally glanced at me. I've been reviewing our senior leadership structure. I nodded, waiting for the usual questions about client relationships or market history. I'll be direct. We're moving in a new direction, he said, finally making eye contact. His eyes were remarkably empty of emotion. The board has approved a comprehensive restructuring focused on agility and digital transformation. I'd been through enough restructurings to know what was coming. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Not thank you for your service. Not this was a difficult decision. Just corporate sterility delivered, without a flicker of recognition for what I'd built. I see, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. May I ask about transition plans for my client relationships? He waved his hand dismissively. HR will handle the exit details. As for clients, we've developed a digital transition matrix that algorithmically matches clients with optimal team configurations. An algorithm. 30 years of handcrafted relationships reduced to an algorithm. Some of these relationships are quite personal. I ventured. The Tanaka Group in Tokyo, for instance. Mr. Tanaka Sr. expects. Eleanor, he cut me off. This is exactly the problem. Modern consulting can't function on personal relationships. It's inefficient, non-scalable. We need standardized processes, not individual rainmakers. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd just described exactly what our competitors offered and exactly why clients chose us instead. But I could see in his eyes that this wasn't a discussion. It was a notification. HR is waiting to process your exit, he said, already looking back at his tablet. And we'll need your building access card, of course. I stood, smoothing my skirt out of habit. Of course. I reached into my blazer pocket and placed my key card on his pristine desk. 30 years reduced to a small plastic rectangle. As I turned to leave, he said, "Oh, and security will accompany you to collect your personal items." That's when I knew this wasn't just a restructuring. This was personal. In 3 decades, I'd never heard of security escorts for departing executives. That was reserved for disgruntled lower-level employees or those suspected of potential sabotage. Is that really necessary? I asked, my composure finally cracking. He looked up, genuine surprise on his face. It's protocol, Eleanor. Nothing personal. But it was personal. As I was escorted to my office by a young security guard who looked embarrassed by the whole affair, I could feel the stares. Colleagues I'd mentored, people whose careers I'd saved, watching in stunned silence as I packed 30 years into a cardboard box. One brave soul, Diana from Client Services, slipped me her personal number on a post-it note when the guard wasn't looking. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Call me." I nodded, tucking the note into my pocket. As the elevator doors closed on my career, I had no idea that this wasn't an ending. It was barely even the beginning. And Evan Caldwell, with his algorithms and his restructuring, had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He hadn't just fired a loyal employee. He'd cut the invisible thread that held everything together. And soon he would learn exactly what that meant. The shock didn't hit me until I was home. My apartment, a place I'd barely seen during daylight hours for the past 3 decades, felt alien in the mid-morning sun. I placed the cardboard box on my kitchen counter and stared at its contents. A few framed photos, a Rolodex I kept as a memento, award plaques, and a jade paperweight gifted to me by the Tanaka family after I helped them through a generational business transition. 30 years reduced to a box that wasn't even full. My phone began chiming with messages almost immediately. First Diana, then other colleagues who'd gotten word of my abrupt departure. Then came the texts from retired executives, former CEOs, and board members who'd heard through their networks. "Eleanor, what happened?" texted Martin Reeves, CEO from 2008 to 2014. "This makes no sense." I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. I needed to process what had happened. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I'd never done before noon in my life, and sat by my window, watching the rain continue its quiet assault on the city. By evening, the calls shifted from concerned colleagues to confused clients. "Ms. Voss? This is Akiko Tanaka. Father is very upset. He tried to reach you at the office and was told you are no longer with the company? There must be some mistake." There was no mistake, I explained gently. The company was moving in a new direction. "Who will handle our account now?" she asked, the worry evident in her voice. "I'm sure they've assigned someone very capable," I said, the professional platitude coming automatically even now. "Father says he will only speak with you. He's threatening to cancel our contract." The calls continued. The European Logistics Consortium, the Brazilian Manufacturing Group, the Saudi Investment Fund, all with the same message: confusion, concern, and in some cases, outright anger at not being informed of the transition. I gave the same neutral response to each. I was no longer with the company. Yes, it was sudden. No, I wasn't aware of who would be handling their accounts going forward. And no, I wouldn't badmouth Meridian Global. I simply confirmed facts. After a particularly difficult call with a Swiss banking client who had been with me for 15 years, I finally called Diana. "It's worse than you think," she said in a hushed voice. I could tell she was somewhere private at the office. "Evan didn't just fire you. He's erased you." "What do you mean?" "Your name has been removed from all transition documents. Clients are being reassigned based on some algorithm he's developed, but there's no handover plan. No continuity strategy. It's like he's pretending you never existed." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. "That's not possible." The Tanaka Group alone has 6 active projects that only I fully understand. The documentation isn't complete yet. I know. Diana's voice cracked. It's happening with all your clients. They've assigned junior consultants to major accounts. People who've never even met these clients are now leading 9-figure relationships. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my clients, not as business relationships, but as people who trusted me. People who had confided their business fears, their succession worries, their family dynamics. I had been more than a consultant to many of them. I had been a confidant, a steady presence through turbulent times. And now they were being handed off like inventory items to strangers who knew nothing about their histories, their preferences, or their unique challenges. 3 days later, the rumors started reaching me. A major presentation to the European consortium had gone disastrously wrong when the new team presented strategies that directly contradicted cultural expectations I had carefully managed for years. The Saudi fund had requested an emergency meeting after receiving contradictory guidance from their new relationship manager. The Tanaka Group had simply stopped responding to emails from Meridian Global altogether. A week after my firing, I received an unexpected visitor. James Harrington, a board member who had always respected my work, appeared at my apartment door unannounced. "This isn't right, Eleanor," he said as I served him tea. "The way they handled your departure was shameful." I nodded but said nothing. "The board wasn't properly informed about your termination," he continued. "We were told there was a leadership restructuring, but your name specifically wasn't mentioned. By the time we realized what had happened, it was already done." "And what does the board think now?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. James looked uncomfortable. "The majority are still dazzled by Evan's promises of increased efficiency and digital transformation. They don't yet see the damage being done to client relationships." "But you do." He nodded. "I've been hearing things. Alarming things. But Evan has controlled the narrative internally. Any problems are being blamed on resistance to change or outdated client expectations." As James left, he paused at the door. "What will you do now, Eleanor?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. The severance package was generous enough that I didn't need to rush into anything. "Take some time. Reflect. You should consider consulting independently," he said. "Your knowledge is too valuable to waste." I smiled noncommittally, but after he left, I found myself sitting at my computer, staring at a blank document. At the top, I typed 2 words: "Next chapter." I had no idea then just how literal that would become. 2 weeks after my unceremonious exit from Meridian Global, I was settling into an uncomfortable new routine. Mornings spent reading news I would have normally skimmed between meetings. Afternoons taking long walks in the park or visiting museums I'd always meant to explore. Evenings staring at the wall, wondering if 30 years of my life had amounted to anything tangible. Then my phone rang at 6:17 a.m. "Eleanor? It's Hiroshi Tanaka." The patriarch's voice was unmistakable, even through the slight static of an international call. "Mr. Tanaka," I said, instantly alert. "How are you?" "Not good. Not good at all." He sighed heavily. "I need your help." What followed was a 40-minute conversation about the chaos that had ensued since my departure. The new team assigned to the Tanaka Group had no understanding of the delicate family dynamics at play. They'd scheduled meetings during a traditional family mourning period for Hiroshi's recently deceased cousin. They'd presented expansion strategies for markets that the family had explicitly avoided for ethical reasons. Worst of all, they'd shared confidential succession planning documents with the wrong family branch, creating internal strife that threatened decades of stability. I tried to explain to the new people, Hiroshi said, his normally measured voice tinged with frustration. "They smile and nod, but nothing changes. They do not listen." I gave him what advice I could, careful not to undermine Meridian directly. When we finished the call, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. These problems were entirely preventable. Before I could fully process the conversation, my phone rang again. This time, it was Philippe Dufresne from the European Logistics Consortium. "Eleanor, thank God I reached you," he said without preamble. We have a disaster on our hands. The pattern repeated itself throughout the day. One by one, my former clients called my personal number, numbers I'd never shared through official company channels, but had exchanged over years of building trust. Each call told a similar story: confusion, miscommunication, and a fundamental lack of understanding about what these clients truly needed. By evening, I had fielded calls from 7 major clients representing over $200 million in annual contracts for Meridian. I was exhausted from the emotional labor of hearing their frustrations while trying to remain neutral about my former employer. As I made dinner that night, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sofia Mendes, the CEO of a Brazilian manufacturing conglomerate and one of my longest-standing clients. "I'm not calling about problems this time," she said after we exchanged pleasantries. "I'm calling with a proposition." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "We're terminating our contract with Meridian. The board voted unanimously this afternoon." Her voice was firm. "We want to hire you directly as our consultant." I nearly dropped the phone. "Sofia, Before you say no, hear me out. We've worked together for 12 years. You understand our company, our culture, our challenges. The people they've assigned to us now, they're smart, but they don't know us. They're trying to fit us into their models instead of building solutions around our needs." I remained silent, my mind racing. "We'll match whatever compensation makes sense," she continued. "But more importantly, we can work the way we always have, based on trust and mutual respect." The offer was tempting, but the implications were enormous. "I would need to think about this carefully," I said. "There could be non-compete issues." Sofia chuckled. "Our legal team reviewed your publicly available employment contract when we heard you'd left. Your non-compete only covers soliciting clients. It doesn't prevent clients from soliciting you." She was right, of course. The standard Meridian contract prohibited former employees from poaching clients for 1 year, but it couldn't prevent clients from independently seeking services elsewhere. "Let me sleep on it," I said. Before I could even do that, 3 more calls came in, all with similar propositions. By midnight, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad covered in notes, client names, and potential fee structures. This wasn't how I had envisioned my post-Meridian life. I had imagined maybe teaching at a business school or writing a book about relationship-based consulting, not building a competing practice from the ashes of my career. But as I reviewed my notes, a realization dawned on me. These clients weren't just seeking my services out of loyalty or familiarity. They were doing it out of necessity. The relationships I'd built weren't just personal connections. They were business assets. Knowledge, context, and trust that couldn't be transferred through a database or replicated by an algorithm. The next morning, I called Diana. "How bad is it there?" I asked. "Worse every day," she replied in a whisper. 4 major accounts have gone dark, not responding to emails or calls. Finance is in a panic about Q2 projections. Evan is blaming the account teams, saying they're not implementing his systems correctly. And the clients who have left? What's the internal explanation? They're saying it's a temporary adjustment period, that once clients see the value of the new data-driven approach, they'll come around. She paused. "Eleanor, they have no idea what's really happening. No one's connecting the dots about where these clients are going." I thanked her and hung up. Then I made another call to Sofia. "I'm in," I said simply, "but I'll need a few weeks to set things up properly." "Take all the time you need," she replied. I could hear the smile in her voice. "We've waited this long. A few more weeks won't matter." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed, "Voss Consulting, Client-Centered Solutions." The consultant behind the curtain was about to step into the spotlight. I approached building my consultancy with the same methodical care I'd applied to client problems for 3 decades. No flashy marketing, no grand announcements. Just a clean website with minimal information. Voss Consulting specializes in high-trust, relationship-based solutions for complex global challenges. My home office transformed into a command center. I invested in enterprise-grade technology that would allow me to serve clients across time zones efficiently. I hired a part-time assistant, Maria, a brilliant Columbia graduate who had been overlooked at her previous firm because she wasn't aggressive enough. Their loss was my gain. Within 3 weeks, I had formalized agreements with Sophia's Brazilian conglomerate and 2 other former clients. The work felt familiar, yet refreshingly direct. No layers of corporate approval. No pressure to upsell services they didn't need. Just pure problem solving with people who trusted my judgment. One evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, I found Robert Chin standing there, my former colleague who had headed Asian markets for Meridian before Evan's restructuring eliminated his position. "I heard rumors," he said with a small smile. "The great Eleanor Voss is building something new." Over dinner, Robert shared what had happened after my departure. Evan had replaced senior relationship managers with fresh MBA graduates who were fluent in data analytics but clueless about the cultural nuances that defined our client relationships. The cost-cutting had gone deeper than anyone anticipated, with entire specialized divisions dismantled and their functions consolidated into generalized teams. "It's a bloodbath," Robert concluded. "And now the numbers are starting to show it." "What do you mean?" I asked. First quarter results came in last week. Client retention is down 22%. New business acquisition missed targets by almost 30%. He leaned forward. "Eleanor, they're hemorrhaging, and Evan is doubling down, claiming it's just transition turbulence." I considered this information carefully. "What brings you here, Robert?" He straightened his shoulders. "I want in. Whatever you're building, I want to be part of it. I've got 20 years of experience and connections throughout Asia. And frankly, I'm bored out of my mind playing golf every day." I hadn't planned on expanding so quickly, but Robert's expertise was undeniable. More importantly, I trusted him. He had always put clients first, even when it meant pushing back against corporate mandates. "I don't have fancy offices or stock options to offer," I said. Robert laughed. "I've had enough corporate perks to last a lifetime. I want to do meaningful work again." By month's end, Robert had brought 4 major Asian clients into our fold. I didn't ask how he'd contacted them or what he'd said. The results spoke for themselves. Then came Michaela Davis, our former head of European operations, who'd been restructured a week after me. Then Thomas Alvarez, who'd led our Latin American division for 15 years before Evan determined his role was redundant. One by one, the seasoned experts that Evan had discarded found their way to my door. We didn't operate from a central office. Instead, we worked from our homes, connected by secure technology and years of shared experience. Our client meetings took place in neutral locations, hotel conference rooms, private clubs, sometimes even the client's own facilities. We were invisible yet omnipresent. A ghost network of experts who understood that business wasn't just about algorithms and quarterly targets. It was about people, trust, and relationships built over years. 6 months after my unceremonious exit from Meridian, Voss Consulting had quietly assembled a team of 15 senior consultants, all former Meridian executives with decades of specialized experience. We weren't just taking clients. We were salvaging relationships that would have otherwise been destroyed by Evan's efficiencies. Meanwhile, whispers about Meridian's troubles grew louder. An article in the Financial Times questioned their radical restructuring strategy after several public client departures. A Wall Street analyst downgraded their stock, citing concerning patterns in client retention. Bloomberg ran a piece titled "Meridian's Missing Millions: When Efficiency Becomes Liability." Evan responded with a PR blitz, giving interviews about necessary disruption and how legacy thinking was holding back the industry. He announced a new AI-driven client matching system that would revolutionize relationship management. The stock temporarily rallied on the news. But the reality on the ground was different. Our network continued to grow, quietly absorbing client after client who had given up on Meridian. Not through aggressive sales tactics or undercutting prices, simply by being what they needed: reliable, knowledgeable partners who understood their businesses at a fundamental level. One rainy afternoon, remarkably similar to the day I was fired, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Eleanor Voss?" asked a hesitant voice. "Speaking." "My name is Jeremy Winters. I'm the new relationship manager for the Tanaka Group at Meridian Global." I raised an eyebrow. How can I help you, Mr. Winters? This is unusual, he stammered. But I'm desperate. The Tanaka Group is threatening to terminate their contract unless I can explain the history behind their Osaka expansion strategy. There's nothing in our database, and my boss says I just need to figure it out, but Mr. Tanaka keeps referencing decisions made in 2016 that I can't find any record of. I closed my eyes, remembering the weeks I'd spent in Japan during that delicate negotiation. The family conflicts, the historical sensitivities, the careful compromise that had satisfied all parties. Mr. Winters, I said gently, I'm afraid I can't help you. That information belongs to Meridian, and I no longer work there. Please, he said, his voice cracking. My job depends on this. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy. This young man was collateral damage in Evan's fight against institutional knowledge. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Good luck, Mr. Winters. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long moment. Then I called Hiroshi Tanaka directly. Mr. Tanaka, I said when he answered. I believe it's time we discussed your company's long-term consulting needs. 2 days later, the Tanaka Group officially terminated their 30-year relationship with Meridian Global. And Evan Caldwell still had no idea why his company was falling apart. 9 months after my firing, I barely recognized my life. Voss Consulting had expanded to 23 senior consultants, all veterans of the industry, with specialized expertise. We operated virtually, gathering in person only when client needs demanded it. Our overhead was minimal, our profit margin substantial, and most importantly, our client satisfaction was extraordinary. We had become the industry's worst-kept secret, not through marketing or self-promotion, but through results and whispered recommendations. Call Eleanor, executives would murmur to one another at industry events. She'll solve it quietly. I made it a policy never to mention Meridian in our pitches or client meetings. We didn't need to disparage them. Their results spoke for themselves. And those results were becoming increasingly dire. Meridian just announced another round of strategic restructuring, Thomas informed me during our weekly leadership call. 300 positions eliminated. They're closing their Tokyo office entirely. Tokyo. Robert's voice cracked with disbelief. That's been their Asian headquarters for 40 years. I remained silent, processing the information. The Tokyo office had been established before I joined the company. It represented decades of careful relationship building in a market where trust took generations to establish. Their stock dropped 12% on the news, Maria added, sharing her screen with a graph that showed Meridian's steady decline over the past 2 quarters. They're calling it streamlining international operations, but analysts aren't buying it. Later that day, my secure messaging app pinged with a message from Diana, who was among the few survivors of Evan's purges at Meridian. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. Evan spent the morning locked in the conference room with legal. Rumor is they're looking for someone to blame for the Tanaka departure. Tokyo office closure has created panic. I thanked her for the information but offered no comment. Diana had remained loyal to Meridian while also serving as my occasional window into the unfolding chaos. I respected her difficult position and never asked her to breach any confidentiality. The next morning brought news that stunned even me. My phone rang at 6 a.m. William Harrison, the chairman of Meridian's board. Eleanor, he said, bypassing pleasantries. I think it's time we had a conversation. We agreed to meet at a discreet hotel bar in Midtown. When I arrived, I found William looking significantly older than when I'd last seen him at a company event a year earlier. The stress was evident in the new lines around his eyes. Thank you for meeting me, he said after ordering drinks. I'll be direct. We've made a terrible mistake. I took a sip of my water, saying nothing. The board has been misled about certain aspects of the company's performance, he continued. We were shown selective data that supported Evan's restructuring initiatives. What we weren't shown was the full impact on client relationships. I see, I said neutrally. It's taken us too long to connect the dots, William admitted. But we've finally realized what's happening. Our clients aren't just leaving. They're going somewhere specific. He fixed me with a knowing look. They're going to you. I maintain my professional composure. Many of our clients come to us through referrals. William smiled wryly. You always were diplomatic, Eleanor. He leaned forward. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss Evan's future with the company. I wanted to speak with you first because, well, frankly, we'd like you to consider returning as CEO. The offer hung in the air between us. A year ago, it would have been the pinnacle of my career aspirations. Now, it felt like a step backward. That's extremely flattering, I said carefully. But I've built something new that I'm proud of. Something that better serves our clients and values our team's expertise. We could acquire Voss Consulting, he suggested. Bring your entire team back. Give you full autonomy to rebuild what's been lost. I considered the proposition. It would be a victory, certainly. A vindication of everything I'd believed in and fought for. But it would also mean returning to corporate, shareholder demands, and the constant pressure to grow at all costs, the very environment that had produced an Evan Caldwell in the first place. I appreciate the offer, William, but I have to decline. He looked genuinely surprised. May I ask why? Because what we've built works precisely because we're not a large corporation. We don't have to sacrifice quality for quarterly earnings reports. We don't have to expand into markets we don't understand just to show growth. We can simply focus on doing exceptional work for clients who value relationships over algorithms. William nodded slowly. I was afraid you'd say that. He sighed deeply. For what it's worth, I opposed your termination. I should have fought harder. It all worked out for the best, I said, and realized I meant it. As we parted ways, William asked one final question. If you won't come back, will you at least tell me how it happened? How you built, whatever this is, so quickly? I smiled. I didn't build anything, William. Evan did. He dismantled a machine that took decades to construct, scattering its most valuable parts. I just gathered them up and gave them a new home. I extended my hand. Good luck with tomorrow's meeting. 3 days later, the business press exploded with the news. Meridian Global CEO ousted in boardroom coup. Evan Caldwell had been removed, effective immediately. The press release cited strategic differences and a desire to return to the company's core values of client-centered solutions. I received the news from 23 different people within an hour. I responded to none of them. Instead, I prepared for a meeting with our newest potential client, a technology conglomerate that had been with Meridian for 15 years. The cycle continued, and the empire Evan had tried to modernize crumbled one relationship at a time. 1 year to the day after my unceremonious exit from Meridian Global, I found myself in a sleek conference room overlooking Central Park. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the faces of my leadership team as we reviewed our quarterly results. Client retention stands at 98.7%, Maria reported, scrolling through her presentation, compared to the industry average of 71%. And our referral rate is unprecedented. 62% of new business comes directly from client recommendations. Robert nodded appreciatively. We've had to implement a waitlist for new clients. We simply can't scale fast enough while maintaining our standards. And we won't try to, I reminded everyone. Growth for growth's sake is what destroys quality. We expand only when we find the right people who share our values. This was the fundamental difference between what we'd built and the corporate machine I'd left behind. We weren't chasing quarterly targets or trying to impress shareholders. We were building relationships that would last decades, solving problems that required nuance and understanding rather than algorithms and flowcharts. As the meeting concluded, Thomas lingered behind. Have you seen the news about Meridian? He asked, sliding his tablet toward me. The headline read, Meridian Global announces new CEO, Jennifer Wilson TO, lead company transformation. I scanned the article quickly. Jennifer had been a senior VP at a competitor firm, known for her balanced approach to modernization while respecting established client relationships. A direct rebuke to Evans/Anburn tactics. She's reaching out to former executives, Thomas said cautiously. Several of our team have received calls. I nodded, unsurprised. Anyone considering returning? No one's jumping ship, if that's what you're asking, Thomas replied with a smile. But there's something else. He hesitated. She's requested a meeting with you. Later that afternoon, I received the formal email. Jennifer Wilson wanted to meet, not to recruit me back, she specified, but to explore possibilities for the future. I agreed to coffee the following week. We met at a quiet cafe near Bryant Park. Jennifer was younger than I'd expected, perhaps mid-40s, with a direct gaze and firm handshake. "Thank you for meeting me," she began. "I know this must feel strange." "Not at all," I replied truthfully. "Business is business." She smiled. "That's refreshingly straightforward." She paused as our coffees arrived. "I'll be equally straightforward. Meridian is in trouble. Deeper trouble than the board publicly acknowledges. We've lost 37% of our client base in 18 months. Rebuilding will take years." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, Meridian had been my home for 3 decades. "I've spent weeks reviewing what happened," Jennifer continued. "And I keep coming back to one pivotal moment, your departure." I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. "The board wants me to approach you about a potential merger," she said. "They believe combining Voss Consulting with Meridian could restore what was lost." I considered her words carefully. "And what do you believe?" "I believe that would be a mistake," she answered, surprising me. "Your company works because it's built on different principles. Absorbing you back into Meridian would eventually destroy what makes you special." "Then why are we meeting?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because I'd like to propose something different." Jennifer leaned forward. "I want to learn from you. Not by acquiring your company or hiring you away, but by understanding how you've created something that clients value so deeply. I want to rebuild Meridian around those principles." I studied her face, looking for signs of corporate manipulation or hidden agendas. I found none. "My door is always open for conversations," I said finally. "But I should warn you, what we've built can't be replicated through strategy documents or training programs. It's built on values that have to permeate every level of an organization." "That's exactly what I want to understand," she replied. As our meeting concluded, Jennifer asked one final question. "Do you ever regret how things turned out? Do you miss being part of something larger?" I looked out at the park, considering my answer. I spent 30 years helping to build something I believed in, only to watch it dismantled by someone who didn't understand its true value. That was painful. I turned back to her. "But no, I don't regret where I am now. I've built something authentic, something that honors the work while respecting the people who do it. We're not larger, but we're better." Walking back to my office, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the shock and humiliation of being escorted from the building to creating a thriving company that embodied everything I believed in about business relationships. Evan had done me a favor, though he'd never know it. By cutting me loose, he'd freed me to build something pure, something untethered from corporate and shareholder obsessions. My phone buzzed with a text from Hiroshi Tanaka. "Meeting was productive. Contract renewal proceeding. Your guidance invaluable as always." I smiled to myself. This was the legacy I'd built. Not my name on a corner office door or my portrait in a boardroom, but the trust of people who valued substance over style, relationships over algorithms, wisdom over data. That evening, as I walked through my office, a converted brownstone we'd purchased 6 months earlier, I paused to watch my team at work. 27 professionals now, each bringing decades of experience and deep client knowledge. There was a quiet energy to the place, a sense of purpose, without the frenetic pace that had characterized Meridian's offices. They had thought I was just another consultant, but I was the thread holding everything together. They didn't just fire me, they untied the knot. And in doing so, they allowed me to weave something far more beautiful,